Teachers, what's the darkest thing you've seen from a student? Not a teacher, but I worked with students. A student was forced to perform fellatio in a vehicle while a screwdriver was held to her neck. When he orgasmed, she made a run for it back to her residence. She had the clarity and ingenuity to keep the semen in her mouth and spit it in a cup for evidence. There was a manhunt and the guy was caught. He was convicted of 3 separate student physical shaming assaults across the state. I was in the emergency room with the student a couple hours after the incident. Standing there as she described what happened, through her tears and in front of her mother, was one of the hardest things I've ever had to witness. I feel really bad for her and wish people never had to go through that, but her spitting in a cup was a really good idea, especially in that traumatizing of a situation. Thinking of something like that is impressive. A student during holiday break a few years back murdered her mother and her mother's boyfriend brutally with the help of her own boyfriend. Then the bodies laid in the apartment as she left and eventually went to a New Year's party days later. Eventually she was arrested along with her boyfriend. Chilling to think she was sitting in my classroom days before, probably with this whole plan in her head. Student would hide in the bushes trying to get near female teacher's feet. Had to advise staff to wear closed-toe sandals shoes because he was so entrusted. Discovered he was drawing women with their feet cut off as well as drawing severed feet in high heels. This student turned out to be Quentin Tarantino. Not my class, but I adopted a rabbit once to keep my other rabbit company. I noticed she didn't have a tail, and when I asked about it I was told she was a kindergarten pet. Apparently the reason she was up for adoption was that one of the children cut off her tail with a pair of freaking safety scissors. She had some issues. I was working at an after-school program as a director, site manager, and one of my employees radioed me needing my immediate assistance at the playground. I raced out there. The employees pulled me aside and said that I needed to look at Lil Billy's back since it was dark outside. She couldn't tell if it was scratch marks or burns. She said she had put in timeout, standing against the basketball pole, and he was trying to lean up against it but kept making weird spastic moves every time he leaned against it, so she asked to look at his back after he said it hurt. I asked Lil Billy to follow me to the nurse's office, leaving the door open. The school staff was all gone, but there are cameras everywhere, and just in case I didn't want anyone thinking I was doing something inappropriate with the kids since I had no idea what I was about to see and or hear. It took everything in my power to not audibly gasp once I lifted the back of his shirt. I counted at least 7 belt loop bruises and 5 lash marks. I asked where he got them from, to which he replied, "My dad. I got a bad grade. This kid got beat with both ends of a belt because he got a P in conduct." I ended up asking his permission to take pictures and I immediately called CPS. When I showed up to work the next day at 2 p.m, City and the ISD police were there. I found out, from the CPS person, that the woman listed as his mom was the dad's GF and she knew the beatings were going on and that this apparently wasn't the first time. CPS and the city police refused to let the GF or dad see him. Good. Mom lived in a neighboring town, so they removed him immediately and sent him there. That's the last I heard of anything. I'm not a teacher. Something like that happened at the special needs school in the UK I went to in my early teens. A friend found the kid a year below mine was covered in bruises. I found out from the head teacher that he was put into care. No one wanted to adopt him. This was in the 1990s and I wonder how life turned out for him. Not a teacher, but when I was in 5th grade my school had a buddy system. Since I was the oldest out of 7 kids, I grew up learning how to take care of troublesome kids. The buddy system went like this. A 5th grader would be assigned a kindergartner. The 2 classes met every Wednesday and did arts and crafts together. Since my teacher saw I was strict with kids and knew how to take care and be responsible with kids, I was put with the most problematic kid. This kid misbehaved a lot, and I got him to become a lot better and didn't think much of it until one day this happened. We were helping the kids cut things out, and they gave us big kids real scissors. I had turned around for just a little to ask my classmate what the next step was when I felt a very sharp pain on my arm. When I turned around I saw that this little kid had cut me. Not a big cut, but still. I didn't yell, but I asked him why he did that. He then told me that that is what his mom did to him, and that it was just tough love. It turns out that this kid had been abused and cut by his mother so much he thought that it was love. It was rough. Not from a student, but about one. Teachers at full staff meeting were warned not to call home for this family. The executive vice principals would, as the parents were liable to abuse the caller. That's odd, we all murmur to ourselves and nearby compatriots. It's not an unusual directive. We regularly have parents that are more hostile to us when we call home about lack of effort, behavior, whatever. But the thing was, this was a good kid. People were calling home to say how awesome he did. The parents were responding aggressively, but to praise. They did not believe us. They were abusing the teaching staff for lying to the parents about this kid. They refused to believe there was an ounce of good behavior or ethic possible from this kid. They hated this child. And oddly, this was not an only child. The rest were fine. Call home all day. But we were not to call home about this one particular boy, because the parents refused to be civil in discussions about him and demanded punishments for imagined crimes, and surprisingly reported through the system. Kid ended up in foster care, but I don't know more. Hope he's got a family that loves him more. Like I said, he was a good kid while I knew him. Had a kid at summer camp one year that kept acting up. One day he actually brought a knife to camp and was threatening some kids that were teasing him. We got the knife from him and of course got the authorities involved. His mom came in and was in tears. She says that he's really a good kid, but she just can't control his emotions and he's never been violent before this little episode. The cops had him in the camp office and during their interrogation he got really emotional and could barely pronounce his words above all the heavy crying. He was telling us about how it feels to be made fun of and how much he hurts. Not one adult in the room could hold back their tears. It was frightening to see how badly he was hurting. Sad thing is that the bullying was never reported to anyone and he internalized it all so well until he snapped. I was very actively involved with the kids, and although I supervised hundreds and thousands of kids counselors, I never saw one occurrence or heard about anything involving this child. He went away for a bit but ultimately returned a few weeks later. A few kids were named and also disappeared for a few weeks. When everyone returned it was like it never happened. We had all sorts of experts show up to counsel the other kids at camp and all of the parents came in several times for workshops about domestic violence and bullying. There was most certainly a silver lining, but witnessing that kid break down was really one of the hardest things I've seen in my 36 years of life. It truly hurt my heart to see him lose it. Nobody should bully anyone for any reason. I'm not a teacher, but I had an off hour in high school and I usually would use it for going home or just hanging out. I was asked by my film photography teacher if I could help with teaching by showing some of my examples and helping mostly 9th graders. I was in 11th grade at the time. I noticed one kid was really quiet and socially awkward, but he had really good prints. And after a couple days I noticed a lot of film was missing, and so I asked my teacher. He said that the quiet kid paid for some extra film to take home and use. I brushed it off for a while until it came to show some of the prints to the class. The quiet kid was third up and I was over near his desk and I noticed some of the pictures he printed. It was two people who turned out to be his mother and father on the floor with what I can assume a large quantity of drugs and alcohol. Most of the photos were of his living situation. It was one of the saddest things I've seen. He was a bright and happy person. I got in contact with him a couple months ago and he's living with his grandparents after his mom and dad got into a fight of money. He now shoots a lot of nature photography. It's good that you reached out and it sounds like, hopefully, his situation has changed for the better. 13-year crying hysterically in class, saying random adult voices are telling him to kill himself. Next day has no memory of incident, but tells me it comes in waves. Disturbing. There was a boy in high school the same time I was who had this kind of behavior. He was schizophrenic and it wasn't fully understood yet. He did not get help until he attacked a sink in the boys' bathroom and ended up broken and bloody. Had a kindergartner smash a glass measuring cup and stab himself in the arm to the point that blood was everywhere, all while repeatedly crying, "Please just let me die. I just want to die." Had to sit in my car and cry for about 30 minutes before driving home that day. My mom was a school nurse and always came home with some crazy stories. One of the most blood-curdling things she has was a girl that was really into cutting to the point where she had a scar that covered the majority of the outside of her bicep. The girl one day decided that she hated her scar and wanted to get rid of it. At home, by herself, she decided she was going to get rid of them. In her bathroom, she took a knife to her arm, cutting a 4 inches by 6 inches piece of scar tissue that was just under an inch thick out of her arm. She then proceeded to stitch it up using a needle and thread and bandage it with gauze all by herself. She then woke up and went to school the next day so she could go to my mom's office and ask if it looked infected. It was. After scrolling through this thread barely blinking for close to an hour, this crap made me stare into the distance. Not a teacher, but I did do a lot of volunteer work with little kids. One of the 5th grade boys was caught grabbing random girls and trying to pull them into the supply closet and try to kiss them. He was even caught trying to grab their butts or without his hand on their seat as they started to sit down. When we finally got to talk to his parents, turned out his grandpa was teaching him these things. The weirdest part was when we questioned the grandpa about it, his response was, "Who cares? They are just little girls." Grandpa's a piece of crap. I taught welding and metal sculpture at the high school level for a year. One morning, one of my students, a quiet, awkward, but really nice young man, came into class and asked me for a band-aid. I asked him what for and he replied that it was for a burn. Class hadn't started yet for the day. He showed me and it was a fresh 2nd degree burn that was already blistering. It was in the shape of an A. Some kids, if I'm going to be honest, they were bottom performers and troublemakers, from a different class of mine, had swiped a small metal letter A from one of my supply bins, heated it with a lighter, and then branded this kid on the morning school bus. He had let the kids do it because he really wanted to fit in. He didn't have many friends and these kids had seemed cool because they were always acting out. As a mandatory reporter, I reported it. The police got involved. Other than that, I have no idea what else happened. Jesus, that poor kid. In elementary school we had a kid with a severe peanut allergy and a teacher caught some kids rubbing peanut butter on the opening of his water bottle. We also had a kid who could describe in detail about how to prepare H. For some reason the peanut butter story bothered me more than the little H chemist. I was a substitute for a while several years ago. I did the special education classes mostly. Everything from kids who simply had a learning disability to students with severe disabilities such as ASD and behavioral issues. One kid had a very low IQ and suffered from ADHD. He would come in every day an absolute mess. He was beyond violent and had zero control over his emotions. It's common to see those sorts of issues in some of these kiddos, but we didn't understand why it was this bad. He had medication prescribed and on file to help with some of his issues. Well, come to find out, Mom had been keeping his medication to do only God knows what with. He wasn't getting anything to help with these very real problems. Eventually this kid lost his crap on the teacher's aide in the class and the school had to expel him. One class I was in a lot had mostly kids with ADHD, dyslexia, mild behavioral issues, and I really connected with them. It was a challenge, but I loved them. There was a boy, maybe 10 years old, who would talk to me quite a bit about his father who was in a local rehab program for abuse. It was a religious thing that kept people on a campus and had them do church stuff, labor, and volunteer work. Anyway, he would give me updates every few weeks. At the end of the year he comes up and says, "Guess what, Ms. Phoenix 0113, I think my dad is gonna come home. He says he's not gonna do drugs anymore and he's done at rehab. I can't wait for him to come home." He went on about how they were gonna do father-son type things. It was heartbreaking to watch a child deal with a parent in rehab for M. He was so hopeful and there was a deep love there. I hope sincerely, every time I think of that sweet kid, his dad is healthy and present for his son. Not my student. He's from the class next door when I was student teaching. This child had a confusing home life. Apparently he was adopted by a family member, but it's unclear what happened to his biological parents. Anyway, he goes through these intense mood swings. Multiple times throughout the year he would pull the fire alarm and made a break for the school's parking lot at one moment, and then deeply apologetic another moment, as if he wasn't in control of himself just an hour ago. During his outbursts he would occasionally attempt to enter a room, and when he found that he couldn't, he would bang the door and scream at the top of his lungs as if it's a zombie movie. And yes, this is all while instruction is happening. He would literally escape the classroom in the middle of a lesson. He has caused lockdowns. As it turns out, this child is suicidal. and his actions might or might not be self-harming in a sense, since he knows these behaviors would earn him a punishment. Apparently, at home, he is being reported to jump out of a moving car. Later in the year he also told his teacher and para that he wants to die. His class was awesome though. His teacher had the whole class write a note to the kid, and they all wrote such sweet encouraging notes. The teacher then made a collage and gave it to him as a gift. After his outburst episodes, when he comes back apologizing, the whole class would give him a group hug. At one point all his teachers talked to him after one of his episodes, basically saying how they have such high expectations for him, how far he has come and how much further he will go. My mentor teacher attended this talk. She cried after. I imagine I would too. Sometimes there is a comical side to this situation, though. One day as I was teaching science, I saw the principal chasing this kid down the road through the window, somehow wielding a long stick as if he's about to shepherd him back to his pen, and I had to just keep teaching and act like I didn't see anything. It was a rough student teaching year. I had stories in my room too, but dang did I learn a lot. I'm so glad the class and faculty were so supportive. I'm sure it helped that kid a lot. There's so many things to say here from a middle school teacher. Here are a few. 1. A video started circulating of one of my students curb stomping a cat. Then a few weeks later, the same student was spreading rumors that they were planning to shoot up the school on the last day. This quickly was taken over by the local police and investigated. 2. I've unfortunately seen way too many students suffer from the after effects of all types of abuse, which is truly heartbreaking. 3. Then there is the classic kid that likes to bring weird toys to school like Barbie doll heads and just play with them as if they are the only one in the room. He would also bring water and vodka bottles and honestly think nothing was wrong with it. 4. Saw a kid try to jump off the balcony. School is 2 stories. Same kid also put their hands aggressively on another teacher. I think the scariest thing is just realizing that there is a chance that you are witnessing the childhood years of a serial killer. One of my teacher friends told me about a student that had super troubled, abusive childhood, had a history of torturing animals, and he would make comments to female students about how much he liked their skin, in a beyond creepy way. And here I was putting vodka in water bottles at school. When I was a student teacher, I taught briefly at a school with very old school approach to teaching. Desks in rows, nothing is shared, no group collaboration, students don't engage, only listen. The demographic that went to this school took their children's education very seriously, and students had very strict parents. On one of the first days meeting my class of grade 3 students, I had the students wash their hands before doing an activity. I was helping some students roll up their sleeves while they were washing. I got to the last student, and my mentor teacher tells me to stop, which caught me by surprise. She pulled me over and told me that particular student had cuts and bruises all the way up his arm from alleged domestic abuse. The relevant government agencies were already involved in the case. She noticed it when she realized he always flinched when she came near his arms. The fact that he never gave high fives, or that he only ever wore long sleeve shirts to school. It was one of those sobering moments where you realize there is still evil in this world. Nothing, and I mean nothing, makes my blood boil more than adults hurting children. There is a special place in heck for those types. The teacher next to me in one portable classroom arrived to find a used condom tied to the doorknob. They did catch the kid that placed it there. It shocked everyone. In my anatomy class I had a kid grab a scalpel and just about try to kill himself in front of me. Had to grab the scalpel and talk him down. He had been suicidal all year. Hope he's okay now. When I was in junior high I was self-harming under my desk with a pencil sharpener. My teacher walked to my desk and discreetly put his hand out. I put it in his hand and he walked away. I still remember that. I wish I could go back and thank him for it. I've got 2. I had a student casually tell me about how he pulled the eyes out of his rabbit's head. He explained how there was blood everywhere. This was my first day working as a supply teacher at that school, and my first conversation with the student. I later brought it up to support staff and they were shocked he mentioned it to me. Apparently he killed his rabbit because his mom loved it more than she loved him. The boy was now in foster care, as his mother was a drug addict. He shared a lot of really dark stuff with me that day. Another one, more sad than dark. was at a different school. Students had to write their address for an assignment, but this 4th grade girl didn't know hers. Another student asked me, "Do you know where the so and so motel is? She lives there." Really broke my heart, as this girl was so young and innocent, and didn't really understand how unfortunate her living situation was, as she proudly googled the motel and found her address. Really low income part of town. Saw a couple of kids walking down the hallway. One ends up behind another. For no reason at all, punches him in the head as hard as he can. I immediately call him over and ask why the crap he did it. He immediately acts like he has no idea what I'm talking about. If I hadn't seen him do it, I'd probably have believed it. He was so convincing. I remind him there are cameras, and then he admits he did it just because he wanted to. No remorse, no reason, no regret. I had multiple other incidents like that with him through the year. I worked in a low-income, high-needs school then and tried my best not to judge my students, but it was weird to honestly believe this 14-year-old was going to seriously injure or kill someone one day. Darkest thing. I was an intervention specialist. Had a student who was a mysterious pooper. For a while he would poop on the floor in the bathroom and no one knew who was doing it. Ah yes, the mad pooper, as we called our versions of him. Every school and generation has theirs, a timeless classic. I'm not a teacher, but in junior high we had a special ed kid and everyone got along with him. And the 2 troublemakers we had gave him a knife and told him to hurt himself with it. They got suspended or expelled. A list simply entitled "The List" with a few students' names and my co-teacher's name on it. It was a student with some serious behavioral disabilities on it who admitted it was a kill list. RIP my inbox. Lots of people on here who experienced something similar. No, this was not recent. The student received appropriate support after this incident. Well, hey, at least this means you were the fun teacher. Not a teacher, but when I was in high school my senior year, a guy in my English class asked me out. I wasn't into him, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I said that I wasn't really looking to date anyone. Every day for the rest of the semester he sat behind me in class and would describe in vivid detail the ways he was going to murder me. One example of this was him cutting my legs off and dragging me behind his car. Someone told me that he waited for me to leave school one day, but I always stayed several hours late at school for speech and debate practice and theater rehearsal. My grandfather was a band director. I was taking a trumpet lesson with him after school when another teacher walked in and handed my grandfather a suicide note he found from a student I didn't really know. My grandfather left and I went home, and after talking to him later, he talked with the student and the counselor and eventually they got him the help he needed. Off topic, but it must be cool to have your grandfather as your band director. Not a teacher, but in my 5th grade class this autistic kid that had a crush on this girl decided to make his move. They sat on the same table in English, so the autistic kid stands up on top of the table and takes his pants down and shakes his butt for not only the girl, but for everyone in the whole classroom to see. The kid got suspended and surprisingly the girl didn't leave the school, but she was crying of embarrassment. This reminds me of a less severe example from my 5th grade class. Playing heads up 7-up right before the end of class. The autistic kid is positive that the girl he likes picked him, but she didn't. He can't accept any other answer. The bell rings and he blocks the door while yelling that the game isn't over and we have to finish. Poor guy. I'm not a teacher, but in middle school some classmates would do drugs during recess. These drugs ranged from cigarettes to herb to crystal M right on the playground. This is in South Central LA and I never realized how bad it was until I grew up and moved to a richer area in Orange County. Also, pregnant 6th and 7th graders, kids in and out of juvie, middle school drug dealers, etc. Pregnant 6th and 7th graders, excuse me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.